welcome John Robson for the third time this weekend. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
And can't hear, put your hand up and go and move closer.
Yeah, no, I just figure if they can't hear me, they'll creep closer or else further away, which will give us some important feedback if that's what happens. But I am delighted to be here and to see you all again, and especially most of you, of course, I recognize from the conference. So it's a good thing I wasn't just recycling part of yesterday's talk. But I'm not, because Danny asked me to talk about the power of truth, and it has got me thinking. In some sense, I want to be just thinking aloud here. It's just not as settled as my views on, say, how to fix the Constitution. But I think, particularly on a Sunday, it is a good thing to be gathered to talk about how the truth will make us free. As you can't see from my slideshow, I am apparently unable to function without PowerPoint, which worries me because I'm not sure that it came from above. But I was creating this PowerPoint, and I tried. They give you this, templates and different themes. So I tried faith, and it said, we couldn't find what you're looking for. And I tried hope, and they said, we couldn't find what you're looking for. And a few months ago, I was doing some historical stuff, and so I looked up history, and it offered me women's history and pride history, but it didn't offer me, the history of ideas or of liberty or any of that. In this case, I went with a theme called Madison, which was quite nice, but of no use to you because it's not up on the screen. But when I talk about the truth making us free, I think that it's going to do so in two senses, one being politically speaking. I think that there is a powerful sort of tactical advantage in fixing our public policy problems if we insist on telling the truth. But I believe that it works much more deeply, and that there is the importance of being truth tellers goes well beyond whether we actually get the tax system to be flattened in the next 5 years. And speaking of God, I remember Tanya talking about land acknowledgements the other day, and I've decided that it is important to acknowledge that we're on land, because if we were in the ocean, you'd all be swimming for your lives and you wouldn't be listening to me, although, as you may imagine, I would still be talking. Also, my slide that says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and this is an important truth. And it's also an important truth that in North America, prior to the coming of Europeans, the land was fought over by largely nomadic people in this chronic low-scale warfare that frequently was accompanied by appalling atrocities. And so whenever you get this, and for 4,000 years my people were on this land, or for 6,000 years, that's not true. And truth and reconciliation doesn't work if there's no truth. And we have to be willing to say that stuff. And yet, how often do people sit through those land acknowledgements? And you may be thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm sitting there grouchy and so on, but everybody else is feeling good about it. And I was recently at a dinner where they had the land acknowledgement, and I was trying to find the paper bag and looking around. Everybody else is just land acknowledgement, land acknowledgement. And then after the dinner, we got up, and a woman at the table who I've known for a long time, but not all that well, just came over to me and she said, we've got to do something about these stupid land acknowledgements. It's not true. And somebody else drifted over and said, yeah, I hate those things. And before I knew it, a majority of the people at the table were all suddenly aware that they weren't in a minority at the table. But people were afraid to speak up for fear that they would be ostracized or just thought weird. And this reminds me of a point that was made on Friday by one Maxime Bernier, who you've heard of, that truth-telling is contagious. And that's important. It's a powerful tool. This is one of the things that I've been thinking about in recent months, and in a way, all these coincidences in life that aren't. And then Danny asked me to do this topic, and it seemed like, okay, it's all kind of coming together, including that telling the truth has a powerful accumulating effect. And I have learned over many years in public policy that one of the most important things you can tell anybody is you're not alone. The number of times I've written a column and then someone's got in touch with me, including these World War II veterans, who said we thought the whole world had gone mad and only we had seen that something had gone wrong, and then I'd written a column about the Canadian military having a sex change operation, and so this was the beginning of a very fruitful friendship. Alas, of course, now these gentlemen are deceased. But this is why, apropos of Ronald Reagan and his plan for the Cold War, my simplistic plan is never tell a lie and never acquiesce in one. And my plan is we win and they lose, right? It all goes together. Because there's lots and lots of people out there sitting through things they know are lies, afraid that only they and a handful of other weirdos know they're lies. And they're just waiting for someone else to say, no, that is not true, and no, I will not pretend that it's true when I know that it's not. And I'm not going to quote Chesterton today, thank you're all going to be very relieved to hear, but I have lots of quotations in my slides from other people. And one of them is from Agatha Christie, who was talking about her childhood, and she said, there's nothing more wonderful to have in one's life than time. I don't think people get enough of it nowadays. But you open your eyes, and here's another day, another step on your journey to an unknown place. That very exciting journey, which is your life. Not that it is necessarily going to be exciting as a life, but it will be exciting to you because it is your life. And again, that sense of life is an adventure, very Chestertonian. But I also started thinking about it not in terms of, you can easily slide into, okay, well, you get your life and I get mine, and you get your values and I get mine, and you get your truth and I get mine, and all that postmodernism that leads into this terrifying modernist, primitive, relativist nightmare. And I would be showing you a slide of Modris Eckstein's book, The Rites of Spring, at this point, if I had a PowerPoint, but that's a topic for another day, maybe another conference. For here, I got to thinking about the ways in which one encounters the truth. And another book that I've been reading, it's called Disruptive Witness, Speaking Truth in a Distracted Age, that somebody at Augustine College had suggested. And I couldn't make head nor tail of this book for about the first 3 chapters. I was thinking, if it weren't recommended by somebody whose judgment I trust, this book would have gone into the bin by now. And then somewhere around chapter 4, I suddenly got it. And he was talking about how this predominant sort of metaphysics of our day is that life is about this journey to find your true inner self, this authenticity that has always been within you, and only social pressure has kept you from finding it. And the author was saying that that's not what really brings freedom and contentment, just becoming absorbed in yourself. And I made a note that truth is not a lifestyle choice. That this idea about speaking truth and always trying to live the truth is something far more dramatic and far more powerful and far less pointlessly self-absorbed. And I thought, this cliche of some guy who's in prison for a life sentence for murder and finds God and says, for the first time in my life, I'm free, and will never set foot outside the walls of that prison, but is no longer living lies, and is no longer trying to back up lies, and is no longer telling the parole board, I didn't do it, I was framed, oh, the no good judge, and who's for the first time ever realizing that there are objective truths, that there are duties that are real, and if you do those, you flourish. Your life becomes real and vivid instead of false and shallow. And of course, I was then going to quote Kenny Stabler, remember the Oakland Raiders quarterback back when that team wasn't an embarrassment, who would finish every huddle, I'd outline the play, and then he would say to his teammates, easy to call, hard to run, let's go. And of course, it is easy to say, let us always be truthful. It is somewhat harder to do it, and especially if you catch me in a fib, you're going to say, well, thanks for the advice. But of course, I'm not here to tell you you should be more like me. I'm here to tell you that the path of righteousness is the only path worth treading, whether I fall off it into a prickle bush or in some other way embarrass myself or not. And I say that because I did want to talk a little bit about my own life, which is very interesting to me, however tedious it would be to you. And I was raised in an urban, sophisticate environment, academic, and had all the kind of progressive beliefs that a person would have at that age. When I was a kid, my parents took me to peace marches. And we also helped stop the Spadina Expressway in Toronto, which actually was probably a good idea. And as I became an adult and thought about the world and did what I thought I was meant to do, which is be open-minded, strange things started to happen to me. And one of them when I was probably around 22 or 23, and I suddenly realized that I thought everybody should own a gun, that I did not believe in gun control. And this was troublesome to me, because I thought, if I ever let anybody know that, I am going to become a pariah. And in a way, rightly so. I'm going to be this crank, ranting on a street corner in a greasy coat with a straggly, unkempt beard. Like, this is somehow something burdensome that has come onto me, and I don't know what to do with it. So I said, well, I think that an armed citizenry is a good guarantee of liberty, and I think people have the right of self-defense. And the funny thing is, it wasn't like putting a rock on my shoulders. It was like taking off a weight. And I thought, oh, that's really strange. I actually feel better now. And then subsequently, I started to question abortion on demand. And I remember particularly my sister-in-law was pregnant with the first kid. My siblings had children at a normal point in life, and I had kids later. So I had nieces and nephews long before, but my sister-in-law was pregnant, quite pregnant, and I put my hand on her stomach, and I felt a kick. And I just knew there was a baby in there. And I thought, well, now this is it. Like, I've gone mad, right? Because we all know what those pro-lifers are like. Again, I said, gee, you know what? I guess I'm pro-life. I think the unborn are human beings and they should be protected. And again, it wasn't putting on a burden. It was taking one off. And I thought, gee, this is so strange. This is not at all what I thought was going to happen. I feel better. I feel lighter. I feel more joyful, even though a lot of people now are all shuffling away from me there on the bench and calling me dirty names. But it's okay, because I know they're wrong, and I know they're in a place they shouldn't be, but this just feels right to me. And it has gone on. And of course, again, as I think you realize, I'm an adult convert to Christianity. And this is a lot worse in a lot of people's views than just becoming in favor of gun ownership. And again, you think to yourself, well, I'm a columnist, I have this position in life, and when people find this out, that's going to be the end of my public career. And it's all fine and good to say, blessed are you when you're persecuted for my name. It's like, yeah, sure, fine. A lot of really good people have done that, but, this is sort of like me as opposed to being somebody else. And this is my own personal hide that's going to get flayed off me here, and I'm quite attached to it. But again, the pattern continued. I thought, I just feel better. I feel easier about this. And although I may well be the object of ridicule, I've gradually come to understand over the years that I've actually been an object of ridicule all my life, so I've got nothing to lose particularly. But anyway, if I'm going to get ridiculed, let it be for the truth and not for some fatuity. And in this sense, this idea that trying to become a truth teller, this radical notion of not counting the cost before saying something, and I don't mean being stupidly belligerent or being ill-informed. Obviously, you want to check both what you're thinking and how you're thinking it and then how you're saying it. But this idea that when I'm comfortable that this is the right thing, this is the true thing, that it frees you rather than trapping you to have to come out and say, I know this is what is going on and this is how things are. And one of the things about it that I've increasingly realized is that it brings with it a dignity, that being part of a howling mob or sitting quietly fearing to say what you actually wish somebody would get up and say is not. And so all of this, he makes me to walk in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And then the psalm goes on to say, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And you find out that this is actually a better way to be. So that's my life, which fascinates me and bores you. But I also wanted to talk a bit about public policy, and to start with Martin Luther King Jr., because he is remembered. I mean, I think he has got to be, among the greatest Americans ever. Probably in the top 3 at least. Among those who American speakers, he's clearly in the top 3. He may be the best, and he is the only one of whom we have actual records. I mean, we don't have a recording of Lincoln, but we do have his I Have a Dream speech. And I show this to my history class. It's 17 minutes, and, I'd like to talk, but I just say they've got to see this. They've got to hear this. They've got to get drawn into this incredible moment at the Lincoln Memorial. And one of the problems that King has, and has been true of everybody pushing for rights for Black Americans, is that against the force of resistance and the virulence of it, it's very dangerous to say what you really think. And so, including not just that you might get lynched, but there's this problem that if you say what we want is full equality, legal, economic, and social, then you're liable to stir up a huge contrary reaction, which you might avoid if you said we just would like not to be lynched. And for the rest of that, we don't care if you hate us, it's fine. But King didn't trim his sails. He didn't say we only want halfway equality. He said that I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. And those of you who do not study American history might wonder what the heck interposition and nullification were all about. And the answer is the people who stood for that are forgotten, for the most part. Though, in fact, the person in question was Governor George Wallace, who ran in 1968 on a white supremacy ticket and got quite a few votes, and then himself became an advocate for civil rights. That King did win over the very people who were most opposed to what he was standing for. And he did it because he told the truth. And he told the truth in ways that were not deliberately offensive, but that were very challenging. And so I have to look at the slideshow because I realized I put a couple of things in it that I didn't actually include in my text that are worth saying. Come on. And again, this is all from the I Have a Dream speech. Here we go. I think here we go. Come on. And he, for instance, at one point in the speech, he says, no, we are not satisfied. And we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And then the place I found it online has a little footnote, Amos 5:24, because they didn't count on their audience knowing it, which King would have counted on his audience knowing. But he was not shy about putting this into a Christian framework and saying to Americans who back then were, or at least thought they were, overwhelmingly a Christian people, that what you are doing on race does not fit with who you think you are. And I challenge you to be who you think you are. And this is one of the reasons King was so effective, because he called to their knowledge of the truth. And he also said, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. And so, again, there were a lot of people who were tempted to resort to violence. And of course, the 1960s became violent in part because of things like the Black Panthers, and they had all those urban riots and so on, which really didn't help anybody. But King knew that that was not the truth. And he said that was not the truth. And he knew he might get killed, and he did get killed. Not by the authorities, but by some lone kook. But he knew that he had to say what he had to say, and he had to say it forcefully but charitably. And that is why he is a giant, because he was a truth teller the whole way. And he relied on a truth that everybody knew in their hearts, just about. And he told them, you can't keep it hidden in there. And by the way, I remember when I was at the University of Texas, of course, there were quite a few Christians even in grad school, of whom I was not one. And I remember one of them saying something about what would be the right way to behave and so forth, and somebody else saying, oh, come on, that's just for Sundays. And I said, no, that's for all the time. And in the kind of language that they used down there, the fellow who was a churchgoer, he said to me, oh, John, do you worship? And I said, no, I'm afraid I don't. I said, but if I did, I wouldn't just do it one day a week. And this is part of what Martin Luther King tapped into. And I think that his dream lives on. There's a lot of people these days who want children to be judged by the color of their skin, not the content of their character. But in the end, I think that's a blip, because we all know that King was right. And a second example that I wanted to bring up, as you know, Patrick Moore has been to a number of our conferences. He couldn't make it this year. And he's talked about climate and various other issues. And I've kept trying to get him to come and give a talk that I'm now going to paraphrase. Because I had this picture too, but he is the guy hugging the seal, right? He is this most famous picture when Greenpeace was trying to stop the seal hunt, which they thought was brutal. And Moore and a group of unkempt maniacs decided they were going to change the world by opposing an American nuclear test up in Alaska. And they, you know, as radicals will, they thought everything was one, so they called it Greenpeace, right? Environment, peace, social harmony, all this kind of stuff. And what I wanted Patrick to come and talk about is the way in which this very small group of people, and some of them have now tried to read him out of the founding of Greenpeace, but unfortunately things on the internet get archived, and he was a co-founder. They stood firmly on a truth, and it was a truth. Greenpeace believes a lot of dumb stuff, and it's easy to get mad at them. But they said we are doing things to the environment that we can't keep doing, and we've got to stop. And that we are doing things to sentient beings that we should not do to them. And we have to stop what we're doing to the whales and so on. And the people in Greenpeace changed the world. And they changed the world because they stood firm on principle. And then, when Greenpeace stopped telling the truth, I mean, they were always a bit loopy, but that's, you know, these things will happen. But when they stopped telling the truth, when they called chlorine the devil's element, and Patrick is trying to explain to them that it's in salt, and the oceans are made of salt water, and nobody could live without chlorine, and they wouldn't stop, and he left, because they were no longer truth tellers. But there is something important and good about what Greenpeace got done because of the fact that they wouldn't back down from what they thought needed to be done. And by the way, Patrick told me one of the things they had, he called it the giggle room. When you're engaged in some stunt on behalf of your beliefs, and your opponents act so idiotically that you couldn't have scripted it better, and you have to sit there and not actually laugh, but inside you're in your giggle room thinking it's like they're on our side. But it's amazing how people who do not adhere to the truth make themselves ridiculous given half a chance, because there is a dignity to truth that lies just do not have. And another example, I think particularly pertinent to a Sunday talk on truth, I teach at Augustine College, and I've spoken to various Christian groups, and one of the things that I try to make them understand is that the core tenet of Christianity is that a dead Jewish carpenter was God. And that this is, in fact, a ridiculous thing to say. And everybody knew it. They even knew it at the time. Remember what Paul says in Corinthians, "But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness." And it's a stumbling block to the Jews because they are expecting a Messiah, but he's going to be like Judas Maccabee. I don't know if you know this, but Maccabee means the hammer, right? And Judas Maccabee just walloped on their enemies and, restored Israel politically. And that's what they thought they were going to get, as a military and political leader. And instead they got this guy who went around saying to be nice to people, even if they're awful, and then got, hanged from a tree in the biblical language. And so that's not the Messiah that the Jews were expecting. But to the Greeks, the whole story is, on the face of it, utterly stupid. And again, you think about the people who came and evangelized the Saxons in England. You're saying, here's the deal. I'm going to shave my head, get in a rowboat, and go over to these guys who are drunk all the time and performing rituals called a blood eagle on people who irritate them. And I'm going to tell them that a dead Jewish carpenter is God, and can I buy some life insurance? And out of the office, buddy. But the thing is, they went and did it anyway. And when Paul talks about the unknown God to the Athenians, he says, you've got this thing to the unknown God. That's because your own religion is stupid, right? Zeus and Hera and all this stuff, Ares, Poseidon, You're sitting here in the land of Socrates and Plato telling me that when it rains, Zeus is having a whiz off Olympus and things like that. None of you believe that. You couldn't be so stupid. And the thing is that the Greeks are like, yeah, our religion is completely mind-bogglingly, embarrassingly dim-witted. Have you got a better story? And they're, yeah, actually, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, right? God is outside the world. He's omnipotent. He's omniscient, not limited by time. And on it goes, because everybody somehow got drawn in by the truth because somebody stood up and said it. And again, you think of Paul going to Athens. It's like, this is not a promising sounding plan. If you did a business prospectus for Paul's trip to Athens, you couldn't get funders. But all of this happens and all of this works because truth does have this transcendent power. It's not just a lifestyle choice. It's not just one way you might. That truth is one of the better policies gag. It's not like that at all, and it's not ahead of the others by 5 inches. It's not truth by a nose. And by the way, one of the reasons I have been writing down quotations obsessively since, of all years, 1984, because I had begun to notice that people will quote things and they will get them wrong in various ways. They will mangle them by accident. They will misattribute them. Right, there's that thing online. It says, don't believe everything just because it's on the internet with a person's picture, Abraham Lincoln. And so I was, also there's a danger. I find myself sometimes remembering something that the person probably should have said that isn't what they really said. And as I was getting ready to do this talk, I was looking for something. I know I've got it somewhere. It's driving me nuts. I have tens of thousands of pages of digital quotations and stuff I've accumulated instead of having a life. But it was that under communism, if everybody had told the truth for one day, it would have collapsed. And I haven't been able to find it. I don't know who said it. And it's like, I would like to think I said it, but I didn't. I just lost the reference. But what I did find was an essay that Václav Havel wrote in 1978 called The Power of the Powerless. And it starts out, the manager of a fruit and vegetable shop places in his window, among the onions and carrots, the slogan, "Workers of the world unite." Why does he do it? What is he trying to communicate to the world? Is he genuinely enthusiastic about the idea of unity among the workers of the world? And Havel says, no, he says, most shopkeepers never think about this stuff. That poster was delivered to the greengrocer from the enterprise headquarters along with the onions and the carrots. He put them all into the window simply because it has been done that way for years, because everyone does it, and because that is the way it has to be. If he were to refuse, there could be trouble. So he said the real message of that sign is, I, the greengrocer, live here, and I know what I must do. I behave in the manner expected of me. I can be depended upon, and am beyond reproach. I am obedient, and therefore I have the right to be left in peace. And you think how much of that there is out there. How many of us are putting our society's equivalent, workers of the world unite? I remember one of my colleagues at the National Post recently tweeted, X'd, whatever I meant to call it, that when he was younger and he read books about dystopian tyrannies, one of the red flags was there was this emblem that was everywhere. That was, I don't know, Big Brother is watching you or something or other. And then he said, and on my way to work today, I passed 20 of those pride flags. And he thought, but nobody's creeped out by it. Well, workers of the world unite. And Havel also said, take note, if the greengrocer had been instructed to display the slogan, I am afraid and therefore unquestioningly obedient, he would not be nearly as indifferent to its semantics, though the statement would reflect the truth. The greengrocer would be embarrassed and ashamed to put such an unequivocal statement of his own degradation in the shop window, and quite naturally so, for he is a human being and thus has a sense of his own dignity. To overcome this complication, his expression of loyalty must take the form of a sign which, at least on its textual surface, indicates a level of disinterested conviction. It must allow the greengrocer to say, what's wrong with the workers of the world uniting? Thus, the sign helps the greengrocer to conceal from himself the low foundations of his obedience, at the same time concealing the low foundations of power. And there's so much of that going on these days. I'll give you another example. You know the slogan, love is love. Well, what's wrong with love? Who's against love? What are you, a bunch of haters? But when people say love is love, I say, oh, are you in favor of incest then? Isn't love love? Right? That's how thin the veneer is. So that essay doesn't say that if everybody told the truth for one day, communism would collapse, but it remains the case. And if anybody finds who really did say that, please send it to me for my collection. Because it's definitely true. One day, if everybody had told the truth about communism, it would have collapsed. And people told the truth privately. I remember my doctoral dissertation, speaking of things that aren't interesting even to me about my own life, but it was about the struggle over free emigration from the Soviet Union. And it turns out there was a joke in the USSR where Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin goes up to President Leonid Brezhnev and he says, Leonid, I've been thinking about this issue, these people wanting to leave. He says, why don't we allow free emigration? And Brezhnev says, well, I would, Alexei, but I'm afraid we'd be the only two left. And Kosygin looks at him and he says, you and who? So you see, most people did know the truth, at least up to a point, but they didn't stand up and say it together. And the regime moved very quickly against the people who did tell the truth because they knew what would happen if they didn't. And as I was just reminded of, life being full of good pieces of serendipity, Jordan Peterson's a case of that. Remember why Jordan Peterson went from being I never heard of this man to international celebrity is because he said he would not use weird pronouns just because the state ordered him to. He didn't say he wouldn't use them. He said, if these evolve naturally, socially, and turn out to be useful, I'm fine with it, but I will not engage in coerced speech. Or, again, as Maxime said when they asked him for his pronouns, are you blind? The power of the truth. If it should happen to me, I'm going to quote you. Because it's like, I don't know, I may not be Charles Atlas, okay, but surely you're not actually puzzled about what you're seeing here. And again, there's like from Stephen Leacock, and you know it. I was recently fighting a traffic ticket because I got this ticket for going 62 in a 50 zone from photo radar, and I felt that this was a breach of my charter rights in that everybody knows they don't ticket you for doing that. So I went into court and got the back of the hand from some justice of the peace who I was required to call your worship. But one of the things I said as they were getting rid of me in order to fleece more and more people was, everybody here in this court drove at least that much over the limit on their way here, if they drove here at all, and every one of you is going to drive that speed on your way home, and you know it. All of you know that I am being treated unjustly because you do it yourself and you don't regard yourselves as criminals. Anyway, I still had to pay them the $90 or $92, but I made it cost them more than $92 to collect it. So it's like, if this is really a public safety measure, fine, you have chastised me. But if this was just a grab for my wallet, you lost money on the deal. This to me is just so important as we go out to fight political battles, to realize what happens if we will not engage in these conventional falsehoods for reasons ranging from a desire not to become unpopular, which, as I say in my case was a lost battle already, to a feeling that we might get more advantage by faking it, that somehow we can lie our way around to the truth, whereas if we tell the truth, we'll wind up in falsehood and frustration. God forbid, as Paul might say. We're not going to do that. And again, one of the things do you want on your tombstone, now I can say what I really think? That is not what you want. You want, and again, you have to be careful about what you think. And I mentioned in my talk about Tony Robbins and the success guru thing, and the fact that I don't think a whole lot of success gurus, but he's tall, and thus obviously one of my aspirations that has yet to be fulfilled. Is to be tall. So I read his book. And one of the things he said is, if you want to succeed, it would be wise for you to choose your beliefs carefully rather than walking around like a piece of flypaper, picking up whichever belief sticks. So, of course, before you say what you think is true, you want to put a bunch of time and effort into making sure that it is true and that you've got a way of reaching out to people where they will see that it is true. It is not to be used to clout other people so you can go home feeling like a lonely warrior for truth, but so that they will be brought into this exciting rebellion against lies and the father of lies. And another example, by the way, if you come to the EEA conferences, you will frequently hear Danny point to the Regina Manifesto and say, here these guys laid out a utopian program back in 1933, the CCF that became the NDP, and then they got it done. And again, we're not in a my truth, your truth, right? The Regina Manifesto was full of bad ideas based on fallacious reasoning that led to disastrous results. But the point is, it was true that they thought it should be done. It was true that they intended to do it. And it was true that they were not going to be turned aside by ridicule. When Tommy Douglas wanted to bring in socialized medicine and people said the forces arrayed against you are too strong, it's like, St. George didn't measure the dragon. He just went at it. And Douglas adopted the right approach to the wrong ideas. But adopting that approach of saying it is true that we think this. It is true that we are going to do this if we are able to do it, and it is certainly true that we are going to try. Instead of this classic thing that happens where conservatives will say, oh, we don't really think we should have a high carbon tax. And someone says, oh, so you don't believe in the science of climate change? They go, yeah, sure I do, of course I do. And then they're done, right? Stick in a fork. But all they need to do is say, no, I don't. And neither do a whole lot of scientists, and here are 7 reasons why I don't believe it, and you shouldn't either. And you know what happens then? Amongst the hostile press, person after person gives them a microphone and says, what did you say about climate? And they get to say it again. And on it goes. And more people out there who know that the weather isn't worse today than when their grandparents were kids will say, amazing. I thought I was the only person. And now I hear it from you, and I realize that other people are clapping as well, and that we do not want the workers of the world to unite, and we don't even really understand what that stupid slogan even means. And, I keep hearing a certain politician claim that he wants Canada to be the freest country on earth, which is a great idea. But the trouble is, I don't actually think he believes that. And I certainly don't think he knows how to make it happen, because then I don't hear him saying we will repeal the Canada Health Act, and we will reduce the tax burden, and we will get rid of all the bureaucrats who have been hired in the last 9 years. All these things I talked about yesterday, the low-hanging fruit, don't follow. I am not hearing a truth teller there. I am hearing a focus group slogan, and it's a good slogan, but it needs to be backed up by conviction and by a plan, all of it anchored in truth. And again, a thing that you will often hear from Danny, and it is true and good, that you try and get politicians to go out there and advocate for one of the things we all know should happen, and they say, oh, there's no constituency for it. And because nobody ever said it. Why don't you try it and see what happens? And I had this argument with the Reform Party back. I was their social policy researcher way long ago. And I kept making suggestions that we should suggest less government, because people were fed up with there being so much government. And they're like, oh, but nobody supports that. I was like, nobody ever suggested it. Why don't you try it? Because the thing is, your supporters actually think that you're right-wing nuts, that you're lying about it. And your enemies think you're right-wing nuts, but you're lying about it. So why not try being right-wing nuts and see what happens? And they're like, oh, well, then we'll never make Preston Manning Prime Minister with your crazy approach. And I said, you're not going to do it this way. And they fired me. But I noticed that he never was Prime Minister, and I noticed that I'm still in Ottawa long after all the people patting me on the head for my unrealistic approach to public policy have departed. So, as Arthur Dent once said, we'll see who rusts first. And in keeping with that, the place I want to conclude all of this is with something that George Washington said in his opening remarks to the Constitutional Convention in 1787, at which someone commented, Washington spoke rarely, briefly, and to the point. So, I'm obviously not like Washington, but there you are. Also, he was tall, so what a ripoff. There I'm not. But anyway, he said to the delegates, let us raise a standard to which the wise and honest can repair. And you notice the honest, that this banner is the banner of truth. And in fact, what Washington said was, let us raise a standard to which the wise and honest can repair. The event is in the hand of God. And so, again, I'm not promising that if you tell the truth, everything will work out in your life. I'm not even promising that things will work out in your life as well as they did in mine, which is not, again, perhaps the greatest advertisement you could possibly have. But I am saying that this is the path that leads to fulfillment, to growth, to regeneration, to dignity, and, as a side dish, to policy success of a sort you're never going to get any other way. So the reason you want to tell the truth, in my view, here on a Sunday, is that Christ is the way and the truth and the life. And he couldn't be the way and the life if he were not the truth. So that I think is a good enough reason right there. But it also will get rid of all those wretched workers of the world unite signs, and it will replace them with ones that say and mean Canada is free and freedom is its nationality. So, easy to call, hard to run, let's go.